Hey guys, what's going on? It's Clever Techie, and in this video we're gonna learn CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It's used to describe how HTML elements should look like, and CSS is responsible for the design or style of the website. And before we go into the syntax and code, let me show you what we're gonna be making. So this is a website that we're gonna be making, and this is what it looks like in pure HTML. So it's just formatted in pure HTML, and the main purpose of CSS is to style our website and make it look like this. And as you can see, it looks much better than its pure HTML version, and that's the whole point of CSS, is to make our website look really good. So once again, CSS is responsible for design or style of the website. Alright, so here you can see what the CSS syntax looks like. And I've highlighted all the CSS in purple and HTML is in blue. So first we got an H1, which is our header tag. And then inside of the curly braces, we have something called declarations, which is a property and value pair, which is separated by a colon. So here we got a property called color, which applies to the text color, and we have a value which is blue, so that's gonna make our H1 blue. And then we have a second declaration which is separated by a semicolon. This time we have a font size for the property, and value is 12 pixels. So that's gonna make our H1 font size 12 pixels. Also highlighted in blue here, you can see what the HTML tag actually looks like that this selector is going to be applied to. So this CSS selector is going to select all of the H1 HTML elements or tags which are located on that page, and is going to style them with color blue and font size 12 pixels. So that's one way to select an HTML element with CSS. Another way is to use a class, and all we do is put a dot and then a class name. And the class name can be anything we like. So h2.cow is gonna apply to all of the HTML elements with h2 class equals cow. And so the way to assign a class to our HTML element is to use a class as an attribute name equals, and then the class name in double quotes. So this h2.cow selector is gonna be applied to all of the HTML tags with class equals cow. Okay, so that's how we select HTML elements using class, and the last way to select elements is to use the ID. And we use a pound key in front of the ID name. The ID name can be anything we like, and this is how we assign the ID to our HTML element. We just use an ID for an attribute and then the ID name in the same way that we did for class, but instead of class we put ID as the attribute name. And so this ID selector is going to be applied to the div ID equals Navbar, and is going to make the text red and border 2 pixels of that div element. And those are the 3 ways that we can use CSS selectors to assign cascading style sheets to our HTML elements. The main difference between class and ID is you should use class if you know that multiple HTML elements or tags are going to have that same class name on a page, and you should use ID if you know for sure that only one single element is going to have that ID. So don't use the same ID Navbar on more than one HTML tag. Only use it exclusively for one single element. So that's the only difference between class and ID. Alright, so over here on the right side you can see code, and this is what the HTML code actually looks like that we just went over. So there are 3 ways to use CSS: internal, external, and inline style. The internal style is used to style one single page, so you should include style tags directly on your home page and just type up the CSS on that single page if you know your site is only going to have one page. Then there's external style, which is what we're going to be using in this video, and it's used to style the entire website. And the way to do this is we first create a file with .css extension, and then we include that file from our HTML page inside of our head tag, and we write link rel equals style sheet type equals text /css href style.css, which is the destination of our file. And that's how we include the entire CSS file. And of course, inside of that CSS file, we're gonna have all of our CSS code. And then the last one is inline style, which is used to style a single element. And the way to do this is to use a style attribute within the HTML tag, and then write the CSS without the curly braces. So we use double quotes and we omit the curly braces. All the other syntax is exactly the same. Alright, so now that we know what CSS is and what the syntax and code looks like, let's go ahead and actually code our website. Alright, so what I have here is index.html and style.css. They're both completely empty, and we're gonna go ahead and start coding the entire site in HTML and CSS, and the final version is gonna end up looking like this. Alright, so first of all, let's go ahead and define our doc type HTML to let the browser know that we're going to be coding in HTML5. Open up the HTML tag, open up the head tag, close the head tag, and inside the head tag let's put title of our website, which is going to be about Kamba frog medicine. Now inside the head tag, let's go ahead and include the style sheet right away. So link rel equals style sheet type equals text /css and href equals style.css, because that's the name of our style that we're including. Okay, now let's go ahead and open the body tag, close the body tag, and close the HTML tag. Alright, so now we got the basic structure of HTML. So when looking at our design, we can see that the layout of our website consists of a container which contains all the content inside of it. And at the top we have a navbar, and then right below the navbar we have a Jumbotron, which has the logo, the company name, and the slogan. Underneath the Jumbotron we have a ribbon, which is just for aesthetic purposes, and then underneath the ribbon we have the actual content part. And this content is actually split into two columns. On the left column you have a picture, and on the right column we have our text. Down below we have social media icons, so we're gonna create another div for that. And finally below our social media we have a footer. So we're gonna create divs for the navbar, Jumbotron, ribbon, content, social media, and footer. So let's go ahead and code all those divs right now. Okay, so the div that's gonna hold our entire website is gonna be called main, and so we're gonna create a new div and give it a CSS ID equals main, because that's the only HTML element that's gonna have that ID, so we're using ID instead of class. Then we're also gonna have a navbar, and we're only gonna have one navbar, so we're also gonna assign an ID to this div element. Underneath the navbar we have a Jumbotron, which is gonna hold our logo and the slogan. And because we need to center our logo, we're gonna create another div inside of the Jumbotron and just call it logo. Alright, let's go back to the finished version and see what we got here. So we've taken care of the navbar, the Jumbotron, the logo, and now we're at the ribbon part. So let's go ahead and create the div for the ribbon. And notice that I'm using IDs for all of these HTML elements because there are the only HTML elements that are going to have those ID names. Alright, so underneath the ribbon we're gonna have our main content of our website with ID content. And since we're gonna be splitting our content in two columns, we're gonna name this one left and this one right. The left one is gonna hold our image and the right one will hold our text. Okay, so within the content we want to put div ID equals left and div ID equals right. Alright, so moving down we have social media footer and then another footer right beneath that. And those footers are just outside of our content div, but they're still inside the main div, so we want to put it right in between the content and the main div right here. So since we got two footers, we're gonna name the first one footer 1 and the second one footer 2, which is gonna be right below our footer 1. And inside of our footer 1 we're gonna create another div which is gonna hold our social media icons. And that's it for the layout part of our HTML and CSS. Now before moving on and coding CSS, let's go ahead and add the rest of the HTML so that the HTML part is taken care of. So inside of our Navbar div we're gonna have our links, and the way we're gonna create links is using the unordered list with list items. We're gonna have 5 links, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is gonna be book a session, home, about, fact, and contact. Now our book a session is gonna be a little bit different from the rest because we want it to stand out a little bit more, so it's gonna be bold. So we're gonna go ahead and assign a CSS class to it. Okay, so the first one is gonna be class session. And the link for this one is gonna be a href equals session.html. Close our a tag, book a session. Alright, now let's go ahead and create a second link. It's gonna be our home page, so we're gonna link it to index.html. Name it home. And I'm just gonna go ahead and copy all this so it's a little bit easier to type. Name this one about. This one is fact, frequently asked questions. And the final one is contact. Okay, that's it for the Navbar HTML. Let's move on to logo. img src equals logo.jpg. And I already have all my images inside of the same folder as the index HTML page. So it's the logo, the nature, which is going to be the background of the page, the ribbon, and the picture. Also inside of our logo, so inside of our logo, we're also gonna have the header, which is gonna be the name of the company, as well as the mission statement. Okay, so right below the logo, let's go ahead and create our H1. And then the mission statement is gonna be inside the paragraph tag. And also inside of the paragraph tag, I'm gonna add a span with a and also inside of the paragraph tag, I'm gonna add a span tag with a class script. Because we're gonna add this text at the end of the mission statement with a different font. Alright, so moving down to content part, let's go ahead and take care of the image first. So inside of our left div, we're just gonna add an image. And inside of our right div, we're gonna add the header. As well as the paragraph describing what Canva is. Gonna go ahead and paste all this text instead of typing it. As well as the bullets. Alright, so all we have to do on the HTML part is to add the social media pictures and the copyright text. So under social, we're gonna create a new UL. And the reason we're doing this is because we're gonna be aligning these images side by side, so we want to create an inline list so that they're horizontally aligned. And within the UL, I'm gonna add the H1 first. Will leave us a review text. And then add the LIs. And the last one is Google. Let's also go ahead and add links. Okay, and the last part is to add the copyright statement in the bottom footer. Alright, let's go ahead and see what it looks like in a browser so far. And that's what it looks like. That's the exact... And that is what the HTML version looks like so far without any CSS added. So we're gonna make... So now we're gonna add CSS and convert it into this beautiful gem that you see here. Alright, so the first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and go to Web Developer and open up the inspector. And inspector is super useful when working with CSS. You can see that it's highlighting the divs that we've created. And if I highlight the main one, you can see that it's covering the entire web page, which is what it's meant to do. So the first thing we're gonna do is center our main div, so it's centered in the middle of the page like you see here. And to do that, we're gonna use the selector main, which is going to select our main div with ID main. And then we're gonna create declarations. The first one is going to be margin auto, and the second one is gonna be width 80%. And this is going to center our div in the middle. So if I refresh the page here, you can now see that our web page is centered. And if I go back into the inspector and click on the main ID, you can see that the CSS is actually showing up here on the right hand side. And we can actually go ahead and uncheck one of the declarations, and that will remove the CSS from our HTML elements. And this feature right here of the inspector is super handy because you can see exactly what all the CSS elements are doing. So this one is reducing the page width and align it in the center with a margin auto. Alright, now let's go ahead and style our navbar next. So we're gonna select our navbar with #navbar, which selects our navbar div, and then we're gonna create the first declaration is gonna be width 100%, and we're setting the width at 100% because we want the navbar to span the entire web page. Gonna set the height property to 40 pixels and the background color to a particular blue color. So now if I refresh the page, you can see what the navbar looks like. And again, if you use the inspector and click on the actual navbar, you can see all the CSS showing up here. You can uncheck the values and you can see exactly what each one does. Alright, so now we're gonna remove the bullets from our navbar, and also we're gonna use a inline property on a list item so that the links are aligned horizontally. So first of all, we're gonna select our navbar again, and this time we're gonna provide the UL because it's inside of our navbar ID. So we haven't covered this yet, but this is how we select an HTML element which is inside of our element ID. So this UL is inside of the navbar ID, and that's how we select it with CSS. So we first type the ID of our element, followed by the tag name that we want to select within that element, which is UL. And now let's go ahead and use the list style property and set it to none, which is going to remove the bullet points. And we're also going to remove all the margins and all the padding from our list as well. And that's just going to remove any extra spacing around our navbar links. The next item that we need to target is navbar list item. And here again we're selecting the navbar and then the list items which hold our links. Okay, so in order for our links to display horizontally, we need to use display inline and float left. Okay, so now that we have our list items properly aligned, as you can see they're aligned horizontally and our links are all next to each other. Now we're gonna apply the style to our actual links, which is the A tag. So we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna use navbar, and this time we're gonna select the A tag. Now in order for the links to appear as blocks, we simply use display block, and then we can add padding to it, which is gonna add the spacing to those blocks. Let's also add background color, and the actual color of the text with a color property, and we're gonna set the color of the text to white. And finally we're gonna use text decoration property and set it to none, which is gonna remove all the underlining from our links. Okay, let's go ahead and see what it looks like so far, and our navbar is definitely looking better now. So let's go ahead and click on one of those links, and again we can go ahead and uncheck some of these and see what they do. We can uncheck padding and see that it removes the spacing. You can uncheck the background color, you can uncheck the color of the text and text decoration. So you can see that the text decoration is adding and removing those underlines. Alright, to finish up our navbar, we're gonna add the rollover effect over our navbar. And in order to add the mouse over effect, first we're gonna go ahead and select the navbar, followed by A, hover. Now we haven't covered this selector in the syntax yet, but that's how we select the mouse over event. So it's our A, which is a link, followed by the colon and then the word hover. So that's gonna select the mouse over event of our link. And then we're gonna set the background color to a pink color, and we're gonna set font weight to bold so that our text stands out a little bit more. And now we have a cool rollover effect over our navbar. Now we're also gonna select the book a session link. Now we're also gonna go ahead and select the session class here, which is referring to our book a session link. And the way to do this is dot session. Remember, that's how we select the class. And then we're just gonna set the font weight to bold, so it stands out a little bit more. And now our book a session is in bold. Okay, let me close down the inspector here. And the next thing that we're gonna do is take care of the Jumbotron, which is this whole green part here. And we're gonna go ahead and center the logo, we're gonna format and center the text, and we're gonna change the background color to green. So let's go ahead and start working on our Jumbotron. So first we're gonna go ahead and select it, Jumbotron. And remember that our Jumbotron is just below the Navbar, so we're selecting our tag here. And first, let's go ahead and set the height property to 400 pixels and background color to green. Okay, and now we're gonna center and resize our logo. So we're gonna select the Jumbotron and say IMG, which is our image. So it's gonna be targeting this image here, which is our frog logo. Now, in order to center our image inside the div, we're gonna use three declarations. The first property of the declaration is gonna be display, block, margin left, auto, and margin right, auto. And that should center our image in the middle of the Jumbotron. Okay, and the last thing we're gonna do is make our image a little bit smaller. We're just gonna add width and set it to 200 pixels, and height, and also set it to 200 pixels as well. And now our image is smaller. Okay, so now we're gonna center the company name and slogan in the middle of the page and change the font. And since we're not gonna be using the standard font that comes with every user's computer, we gotta import it from Google's fonts. So the way to do this is go to fonts, google.com, and then we're gonna search for the font which is called Great Vibes, and then click on this plus sign to select the font. Now you can see that the family is selected, and so we just gotta copy this part here. And here you can see how the CSS is imported in exactly the same way that we would import our CSS file. And down here you can see how to specify the actual CSS, so we're gonna use font family, Great Vibes, and cursive. Alright, so let's go ahead and copy this link. And we're gonna go to index.html and just paste it inside of our head tag. Now we have Great Vibes font available, so we're gonna also copy this part and go back to our CSS. We're gonna select Jumbotron H1, which is the heading where our text is located. And first we're gonna set the font size to 30 pixels, and then we're just gonna paste the part for the font family. Also, let's align our text with a text align property and set it to center. Also, let's go ahead and center our paragraph, which is this part just below the company name. So it's inside the P tag, so we're gonna select Jumbotron P and then use text align center. Also, we're gonna select this class here, which is script, to apply the same cursive font to the name Vladdy. So we're just gonna type .script to select that class, and then paste the font family to set that name to the cursive script as well. Now let's go ahead and see what it looks like. And now we have our beautiful cursive font, and our website is starting to look a lot better. Alright, so before moving on to the content part, we're gonna do some adjustments. First, we're gonna change the font of our navbar. We're also gonna remove the spacing at the top here. We're gonna add padding at the top of our logo so that we have space between our navbar and the logo. And we're also gonna add a background picture. So let's go ahead and do all of that in our style. So in order to add the background to our page, we're gonna use the body selector, which applies to our body tag. And the body tag comes even before the main div, so that's the one that we want to apply our background picture to. And the property we use for that is background URL and then the name of our image, which is nature.png in my case. Also, we're gonna set the font family to Calibri, and that is gonna change the font of the entire website. Also, to remove the spacing at the top of our navbar, we're gonna use margin 0 and set the padding to 0 as well. So that's just gonna remove any extra spacing around our navbar and our whole website. Save the page and let's see what it looks like now. Alright, it looks a lot cleaner. Now let's go ahead and add the spacing between our logo and the navbar. And to do that, we're just gonna add padding to our Jumbotron. Gonna say padding top 50 pixels. Now if we open up the inspector, we can always look to see what's going on. So we can click on our logo, and you can see now that we have this padding here that we just set. So that's how easy it is to see what's going on with our CSS. If at any time you guys are confused, you can just go ahead and open up the inspector and you can see what's going on. So you can uncheck the padding, you can uncheck all the other elements, you can click on the body tag and play around with that to uncheck the background, uncheck the margins so you can see where the margin has been removed, and all the other elements as well. So if you don't understand how a particular CSS property works, you can always open up the inspector, click on one of the HTML elements, and then play around with unchecking the CSS to see what's going on. Alright, next we're gonna add that ribbon just below our Jumbotron and above the content part, which is gonna look like this. And that's really simple. All we have to do is add the background image to the div below our Jumbotron, which we call the ribbon, which is this div here. So let's go ahead and select the ribbon and then set the background property to URL ribbon.png. Now this is what the ribbon image actually looks like. And since this image is a lot bigger than our div is gonna be, we can actually play around and target all the different parts of the image to get different results. So let me show you what I mean here. So first let's set the height to 50 pixels and then see what it looks like. So at this point we can just leave it as it is, but we can also change the background position property to target a different part of the background, and that will give us a different pattern. So if we set the background position to 20% by 20%, and that just targets the x-axis and y-axis of the background. So now if I save the file and refresh the page, we're gonna get a different pattern. And if we open up the inspector and select the ribbon, you can check and uncheck background position to get a different pattern, and you can also play around with different values here to get a different pattern as well. Alright, now let's move on to the content part. So first we're gonna go ahead and select the main content div. I'm gonna set the width property to 100%. Gonna set the padding to 10 pixels. We're also gonna set the background color to white, because right now you can see that it has our body's background, which is not what we want. So now if I refresh the page, so now you can see that the background is white, but you can also see that our content is now overlapping the main div, which is not what we want. So if you go to the inspector, you can clearly see how our content div is going over the... You can clearly see how our content div is going out of bounds. So to fix that, we're gonna use a property called box sizing. border box. And that is going to make sure that the content doesn't go out of bounds of the main div. Okay, so first we're gonna go ahead and select the left div, which is holding our image, and we're just gonna set some margins. We're gonna set margin right so that we have spacing between our image and the content, and we're gonna set margin top to 15 pixels. Then we're gonna target the image, which is inside of our left div. We're going to add the round border to our image with a border radius property and set it to 20 pixels. We're also going to change the width and height of our image to make it a little bit smaller. Alright, let's see what it looks like. And so you can see that our text is overlapping the image and it's not looking good at all. So to fix that, we're gonna add a display flex on our content div, because remember that the left div and the right div is inside the content div. So if we add display flex to our content, it's just gonna make it a lot easier for us to align the two divs that are inside of it. So under content div, we're gonna add display flex. And now, if we refresh the page, you can see that our content is already displaying side by side. And the only thing that we have to fix now is the overlap. So for that, we're gonna use an overflow hidden on our left div. And actually, oops, I forgot to put the img here because we're actually applying this CSS to our image. So I'm gonna save the content, refresh the page, and now you can see that it kind of works. And now you can see that the elements are showing up side by side and we got proper spacing between the two, but the right div is pushing the left one all the way to the side. And that's because we need to add a flex property to our right div. So we're gonna go ahead and select the right div and add flex 1 to our right div. So that just adds the proper width for our right div. So now if we refresh the page, everything is looking perfect. Now you can see that we got some weird characters showing up, and that's because we're using UTF characters. So the way to change the character set is to add the meta tag with a char set attribute and set it to UTF-8. So that's gonna fix the character encoding issues on our page. Refresh, and now everything looks really good. Alright, so now all I have to do is style our two footers at the bottom and then we'll be done. So let's go ahead and add the styles for our footers. The first is footer 1, and you can see that inside our footer 1 we also have another div called social, and that's because we need to format our images and we need to align them to the right. So think of the footer 1 as a container, and then the div which is inside of it is the one that holds all the content together so that we can align it within the container of footer 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and style our footer 1 first. I'm gonna say width 100%. I'm gonna set the height to 100 pixels. I'm gonna set the background color to white. And we're also gonna set the padding bottom to 20 pixels. Now let's see what our footer looks like so far, and it's not looking too good. So now let's go ahead and style the social div, which is holding all the content, so that we can properly align our links and images. Okay, so we're gonna say social float right, and that's just gonna align the whole content to the right. And the next thing we're gonna do is align our images horizontally so that they're showing up side by side, just like we did for the Navbar. So for that, we're gonna say social UL. We're gonna set the property of list style to none, and we're also gonna remove the padding and margin from the UL. So just like we did for the Navbar. And then for the list item, we're going to set the display to inline so that our images are displayed inline horizontally. Okay, so it's starting to look better. Now let's go ahead and style footer 1 img, which are going to target the actual images that are inside of our footer 1 tag. So we're gonna say vertical align to middle. We're gonna set margin left to auto and margin right to auto to center our images inside of the div tag. So the only thing that we gotta do now is make sure that the images are not going outside of bounds of our footer. And if we go to inspector and inspect the H1 element, you can see there are really big margins around it. So we're just gonna remove those margins and that should fix the problem. So we're gonna target footer 1 H1 and we're gonna set the margin to 0, and we're also gonna set padding left to 20 pixels to add a little bit of spacing to the left of our H1 element. Also, let's go ahead and set our H1 elements font family to Calibri. So we're doing this without the footer here to set the font for all of the elements on our web page. So this H1 selector is going to target all of the H1 elements that are on our web page. And we're going to set the font size to 20 pixels to make it a little bit smaller. Now if we refresh the page, our social media footer is now perfect. And the last thing that we're gonna style is the footer at the bottom. So for that, we're gonna target footer 2. And let's set the height of this div to 40 pixels. Set the font size to 15 pixels. Background color, I'm gonna set it to light green. Let's set the text align property to center the text. And we're also gonna set the line height property to 40 pixels, which is matching the height of our div. And that's how we vertically center the text inside of the div. We're also gonna add round borders to the bottom of our footer. So for that, we're gonna use border bottom left radius and set it to 10 pixels. And border bottom right radius and set it to 10 pixels as well. Alright, let's go ahead and see what the whole thing looks like. And now our footer looks really nice. And if we open up the inspector here and click on the footer, you may notice that the inspector also comes with this really cool feature. If we click on the actual color of the footer here, we can select the color picker and then select any color that is on the web page. And that's it. We are now done and we have created a beautiful website with pure HTML and CSS. And I hope you guys liked this video. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Clever Techie out.